Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained in secret by Doctor Strange to control chaos magic. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had been bleached of its color. That was the only way Izuku Midoriya could describe the sensation. The vibrant hues of the city, the cheerful reds of passing cars, the brilliant blues of the late afternoon sky, the hopeful greens of the park trees, had all been desaturated, washed out by the 5 words that had just atomized his soul. No, I don't think you can. The words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. They were not cruel words. That was the worst part. They had been delivered by his idol, his god, the symbol of peace himself, All Might. They had been spoken with a weary, pragmatic sadness, the kind a doctor uses to deliver a terminal diagnosis. The kind that leaves no room for hope. Izuku's feet moved on autopilot, carrying him down the stairs of the skyscraper and onto the bustling streets below. The sounds of the city, once a symphony of heroic potential, were now a dull, irritating drone. The chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of the monorail overhead, the distant wail of a siren, it was all just noise. His hero notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, was clutched in his hand. The cover, once a source of pride, now felt like a brand of shame. The pages inside, filled with his meticulous, borderline obsessive observations, were not the work of a future hero, but the sad scribblings of a delusional child. All Might had even signed it. The bold, confident signature was a fresh, black wound on the scorched page, a final, damning piece of evidence of his failure. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic, kid. Realistic. He'd never been realistic. Since he was 4 years old, sitting in that sterile doctor's office, the X-ray of his foot glowing on the light box like a cosmic joke, reality had been his enemy. The doctor's words, clinical and cold, had been the first crack in his dream. You should probably give it up. His mother's tears that night, her frantic, heartbroken apology. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry, had been the second. He hadn't wanted an apology. He had wanted her to say the 4 words that could have fixed everything. You can be a hero, but she hadn't. And now, either had All Might, the foundation of his entire existence, the single, unwavering pillar of belief that had supported him through a decade of ridicule, of being called Deku, of being told he was useless and worthless, had been pulverized by the one man he thought would understand. He was walking through an underpass, the same one where his day had taken its first nosedive. The cool, damp air did nothing to soothe the fire in his throat. He could almost smell the cloying sweetness of the sludge villain, feel the suffocating pressure as it tried to force its way down his lungs. A shudder racked his body. He'd almost died. And for what? For a chance to ask a question he should have known the answer to all along. A distant explosion boomed, rattling the concrete. Izuku flinched, but didn't look up. Just another villain attack, he thought with a profound and terrifying apathy. A real hero will handle it. But as he emerged from the underpass he saw the smoke. It was thick and black, billowing from the end of the very street he was on. A crowd had gathered, their phones held high, a chorus of panicked murmurs rising into the air. His feet, those traitorous limbs that still clung to the ghost of a dream, carried him forward. He pushed his way through the throng, his small frame an advantage for once, until he reached the front. And then he saw it. It was him. The sludge villain. The same murky green, the same leering, oversized eyes. He'd somehow escaped All Might. And he had another hostage. The heroes on the scene, Death Arms, Kamiri Woods, the new heroine Empty Lady, were all struggling. The narrow street limited Empty Lady's movements, the fire kept Kamiri Woods at bay, and Death Arms couldn't get a solid grip on the villain's fluid body. They were doing their jobs, they were following protocol, but they were failing. Izuku's gaze fixed on the victim, thrashing within the villain's gelatinous form. Wild, spiky blonde hair. A furious, terrified red glare. Kaken, Bakugo. His childhood friend. His tormentor. The one who had told him, just hours ago, to take a swan dive off the roof and pray for a quirk in his next life. And now, he was suffocating. His explosions, usually so precise and devastating, were erupting randomly, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts but doing nothing to free himself. He was drowning. Izuku saw his eyes. For a split second, Bakugo's furious gaze met his. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something Izuku had never seen there before, pure, undiluted terror, and in that moment the world snapped. All Might's words vanished. The doctor's diagnosis, his mother's tears, Bakugo's taunts, all of it was swept away by a singular, primal, all-consuming thought that was not a thought at all, but an imperative written into the core of his being. He needs to be saved. His legs moved. He didn't tell them to. He was past the police barrier before he even registered it, his worn red sneakers slapping against the pavement. The heroes shouted at him. "Hey, kid! Stop! It's too dangerous!" He didn't hear them. The world had narrowed to a tunnel. At the end of that tunnel was Bakugo, dying. His mind, the analytical engine that had filled 13 notebooks, raced at impossible speed. Sludge Villain's body is fluid, but his eyes and teeth are solid. He flinched when I threw my backpack at him. I need a distraction. He didn't have his backpack this time. He had nothing. He was quirkless. Useless. Deku. No. The word was a silent roar in his mind. A rebellion against reality itself. His desperation was a physical thing, a white-hot nova of despair and futile hope churning in his chest. He was going to die. He was running toward his own death, and he knew it. But Bakugo was dying now, and that was unacceptable. The unfairness of it all, of his quirkless body, of the heroes standing by, of Bakugo's brilliant future being snuffed out in a sewer of a villain, coalesced within him. It was a pressure building behind his eyes, a vibration in his bones. He reached out a hand, clawing at the air as if he could physically pull Bakugo free. Kaken! And then it happened. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a beam of light or a shockwave of force. For a single, infinitesimal moment, the world glitched. A flicker of crimson energy, like static on a corrupted screen, crackled around Izuku's outstretched fingers. It was barely visible, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it phenomenon. But it was not light. It was an absence, a tear. The air around his hand suddenly felt thin, cold, and fundamentally wrong. A sound like a needle scratching across a record echoed, not in the air, but directly inside everyone's skull. The sludge villain shrieked. It wasn't a sound of pain from a physical blow. It was a primal, instinctual recoil. This new energy wasn't part of the physical world it understood. It wasn't a quirk, which was, at its core, a biological function. This was something else. Something ancient and predatory. The very substance of the villain's being, a chaotic and fluid form, felt an allegiance to this new power, a terrifying urge to simply unravel. To come apart at the seams of its existence. In that moment of existential dread, its grip on Bakugo slackened. That was all the opening Bakugo needed. He managed to clear his mouth and gasp a desperate, ragged breath. That's when All Might arrived. "I really am pathetic," the hero's voice boomed, though it was strained. He had pushed past his limit to get here. With a mighty Detroit smash, he punched the air, and the resulting gale force blew the sludge villain apart, scattering him into harmless puddles. The pressure change even made the sky, heavy with smoke, begin to rain. The crisis was over. Bakugo was on his hands and knees, gasping. The pro-heroes were rushing in, praising Bakugo for his tenacity while chiding Izuku for his recklessness. Izuku stood frozen, his arms still outstretched. He hadn't felt it, not really. It was like a phantom limb, a memory of a sensation. But he saw it. The way the villain had flinched before All Might arrived, the way the light had seemed to bend around his hand. All Might, while being hounded by reporters, locked eyes with Izuku. The boy looked terrified, but there was something else in his posture, a deep confusion. All Might had felt it too. It was just for a nanosecond, but as he'd been arriving, he'd sensed a ripple in the air that had nothing to do with a quirk or wind pressure. It was as if reality itself had briefly hiccuped. He dismissed it. Adrenaline, smoke, the setting sun playing tricks on his eyes. He had more pressing concerns, like the ticking clock of his own power. He gave the boy a thumbs up and was swept away by the crowd. Later, after being thoroughly chewed out by the heroes and then, astonishingly, thanked by a seething, humiliated Bakugo, Izuku walked home. The world was still gray, but now it was a confused, uncertain gray. His despair had been punctured by a tiny, inexplicable pinprick of something. He didn't know what it was. A fluke? A delusion brought on by stress? He tried to rationalize it. Maybe a nearby electrical sign had shorted out. Maybe the villain was photosensitive. He tried to file it away in the unexplained phenomena folder of his brain, but it refused to be categorized. It felt like his. The Sanctum Sanctorum in New York City was a place outside of time and trend. Its stone facade was nestled between a modern coffee shop and a high-end boutique, utterly ignored by the frantic pace of the city. Inside, however, the laws of physics were treated less as rules and more as gentle suggestions. Dr. Stephen Strange, Sorcerer Supreme of Earth, sat in a high-backed chair in the Chamber of Relics. The air hummed with contained power, smelling of old parchment, sandalwood, and the faint, clean scent of ozone that clung to reality-bending artifacts. Before him, a massive, ornate aura, the aura of worlds, turned with silent, impossible grace. Each glowing sphere represented a different plane of existence, a different dimension, all tethered to the central, vibrant blue-green globe of their own reality. His duty was to watch, to monitor the flow of energies between dimensions, to guard the walls of their existence against incursions from entities that would view humanity as little more than a light snack. For the most part, it was a quiet, thankless job. A ward strengthened here, a demonic probe repelled there. His Earth was unique. For the past 2 centuries, it had developed an internal defense mechanism, quirks. These bizarre, wonderful, and terrifying biological abilities had altered the course of human evolution. Magic, once a prevalent force, had waned, overshadowed by the more immediate and scientific reality of superpowers. Strange had become less of a frontline combatant and more of a cosmic gatekeeper, ensuring that the chaos of the multiverse didn't spill over into the already chaotic world of heroes and villains. He was meditating, his consciousness spread thin, feeling the subtle vibrations of the dimensional membranes, when it happened. It was not a sound. It was not a light. It was a scream. A silent, metaphysical shriek tore through the fabric of existence. On the aura of worlds, the central globe of Earth flared with a violent, glitching crimson light for a fraction of a second before vanishing. The entire mechanism shuddered. Ancient relics on the shelves around the chamber rattled. The cloak of levitation, draped over Strange's shoulders, stiffened as if sensing a predator. Strange's eyes snapped open. His heart, a surgeon's heart that had remained steady through countless cosmic horrors, hammered against his ribs. He had felt energies like this before, but only in whispers, in the most forbidden texts of the Library of Cagliostro. It was the energy of uncreation. The grammar of pandemonium, chaos magic. It was thought to be a myth, a theoretical power so unstable, so antithetical to the ordered structure of the universe, that it could not possibly exist in a concentrated form. It was the power to rewrite existence not by bending rules, but by declaring them null and void. A power that responded not to incantations or disciplined gestures, but to raw, unfiltered will and emotion. In the wrong hands, it wouldn't just destroy a city or a planet. It would unravel it, turning reality into a meaningless soup of paradoxes. And for one terrifying moment, that power had flared up on his Earth. In a reality already teeming with unstable variables like quirks, the introduction of chaos magic was like tossing a lit match into a fireworks factory. Wong! Strange's voice was sharp, cutting through the sudden silence. The stout, serious librarian and fellow master of the mystic arts appeared moments later, his face a mask of concern. Stephen? The wards on the 3rd floor flickered. The book of the Vishanti. It turned 3 pages on its own. I felt it, Strange said, his eyes still fixed on the now calm aura. A signature. Raw, untamed. Somewhere on Earth. Wong's expression was grim. A new magical player? A demon trying to manifest? Worse, Strange murmured, standing up. He walked toward the center of the room, his mind racing. It felt nascent. Unintentional. Like a child screaming in a language it doesn't understand. He clasped his hands together, the memory of the energy's texture still fresh. It was chaotic, yes, but it was also laced with a profound sense of desperation. Of a desperate, selfless desire to help. A paradox. He needed to find the source. Now. Before it flared again, and this time didn't stop. A power like that, left unchecked, would act as a beacon. It would draw the attention of things that lurk in the dark spaces between worlds, things that feed on broken realities. Bring me the cauldron of the cosmos, he commanded. Wang nodded and returned with a large, obsidian bowl, filled with a liquid that swirled with captured nebulae. Strange stared into its depths, but the vision was clouded, obscured by the sheer energy of the event. The echo is too strong. It's bouncing off everything. There was only one way. It was a risk, tampering with the flow of time itself, but the alternative was far worse. He raised his hands, tracing intricate patterns in the air. By the hoary hosts of Hoggoth, he chanted, his voice low and resonant. The eye of Agamotto, the ancient amulet resting on his chest, began to glow with a brilliant emerald light. Its metallic eyelids slid open, revealing the shimmering, iridescent time stone within. The world around him dissolved into a torrent of green, reverse-flowing light. He was not just looking at a place. He was sifting through the timeline of an entire planet, searching for the epicenter of that crimson scream. He saw flashes of the day's events across the globe. A bank robbery in Paris, a tidal wave in Indonesia, a political summit in Geneva. Then, his focus narrowed on Japan. Muzudafu. He saw the sludge villain. The fire. The heroes. The boy with green hair running past the barrier. And there it was. He slowed time to a crawl, observing the scene from 1,000 angles at once. He saw the boy's outstretched hand. He saw the flicker. It was so small, so insignificant to a normal eye, but through the eye of Agamotto, it was a supernova. He could see the very code of reality stuttering, the laws of physics bending in protest around that small, desperate hand. The power didn't come from a mutation, from a quirk factor. It was being drawn from somewhere else entirely. From the very potential of the void. He followed the boy's timeline backward. A rooftop. A gaunt, skeletal man. The words, "You can't be a hero." He went further. A doctor's office. An X-ray. The diagnosis, quirkless. Strange let the timeline snap back into place, the eye of Agamotto closing with a soft click. He stood in the silent chamber, the enormity of the situation settling upon him like a physical weight. A quirkless boy. In a world defined by power, he had none. And yet he possessed the potential for the ultimate power. A Nexus being, a living anchor point for his reality, whose emotional state could literally rewrite the world around him. His despair, his selflessness, his heroic desire, it was the perfect emotional fuel for the engine of chaos. The boy was a walking, talking, emotionally volatile cosmological constant, a time bomb with a hero's heart. Wang looked at him, awaiting his conclusion. The source is a child, Wang, Strange said, his voice heavy. A boy in Japan. He doesn't know what he is. He doesn't know what he did. What do we do? Wang asked. Observe? Contain? Strange paced the room, the cloak of levitation swirling around his ankles. The Hippocratic oath he had taken as a surgeon still echoed in his soul. First, do no harm. But what was the greater harm? Intervening in this boy's life, burdening him with a truth that could break his mind? Or doing nothing, and allowing a power he could not possibly comprehend to fester until it consumed him and his entire reality? He thought of the Ancient One. Her pragmatism. Her difficult choices. The burdens of being a sorcerer supreme. There was no choice. Not really. Neither, Strange said, his decision solidifying. I'm going to teach him. Wang's eyes widened in shock. Teach him? Stephen, it's chaos magic. No one can control it. It is the antithesis of everything we practice. Our spells are about order, discipline, imposing will upon the structure of reality. Chaos magic devours structure, which is precisely why he needs a teacher who understands that, Strange countered. His world of quirks is built on a semblance of scientific order. No one there can help him. They'll see him as a villain, a monster, or an anomaly to be dissected. His power is fueled by emotion, and right now, his soul is a maelstrom of despair and desperation. I have to give him an anchor, a purpose. A path to control before he cracks his own world in half. He walked to the main staircase, the cloak settling firmly on his shoulders. He began to weave his hands, conjuring the telltale golden sparks of a portal. "Where are you going?" Wang asked, his voice laced with deep apprehension. "To see a boy about a power he shouldn't have," Strange replied. The sparks coalesced, spinning into a shimmering, circular window. Through it, he could see not the bustling streets of New York, but a drab, dimly lit alleyway in Musudafu, Japan. The adrenaline from the villain attack had long since faded, leaving behind an even deeper, more profound exhaustion. Izuku had made it back to his apartment complex, the silence of his home a looming dread. He couldn't face his mother. Not yet. He couldn't bear to see the worry in her eyes, to lie to her about his day, to pretend that his entire world hadn't been shattered and then bizarrely cracked open again. His mom had asked him to take out the recycling. It was a simple, mundane chore. Perfect. He needed mundane. He carried the plastic bags down the back stairs to the communal disposal area. The alley was grimy, smelling of stale ramen and damp concrete. A single, flickering fluorescent light overhead cast long, dancing shadows, making the overflowing bins look like slumbering beasts. He tossed the bags in, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet night. He stood there for a moment, leaning against the cool brick wall, finally letting the full weight of the day crash down on him. He was pathetic. He'd run in, gotten in the way, and forced all might to push past his limit. And that flicker of, whatever it was, had to be a hallucination. It had to be. Because if it wasn't, what was he? He was so lost in his own bleak thoughts that he didn't notice the change at first. The air grew still. The hum of the fluorescent lights ceased. The distant city noise faded away. Then, a sound began, like the grinding of 1,000 tiny gears mixed with the fizz of static electricity. Directly in front of him, in the middle of the alley, golden-orange sparks began to spontaneously erupt in a circular pattern. They spun faster and faster, weaving a tapestry of impossible light, creating a perfect, shimmering doorway. Through the portal, Izuku saw not the brick wall of the opposite building, but a grand, ornate wooden staircase, lined with books and bizarre artifacts, all lit by a warm, ethereal glow. The air that drifted out of the portal smelled of old paper, exotic spices, and something that reminded him of a lightning storm. Izuku's jaw went slack. His mind, which had been cataloging quirks his whole life, had no file for this. This wasn't teleportation as he knew it. This was wrong. This was beautiful and terrifying. A figure stepped out of the glowing doorway. He was a tall man, a foreigner, with streaks of gray at his temples and a neatly trimmed goatee. His eyes were the most striking feature. They were sharp, intelligent, and held a weariness that seemed ancient. He wore an ornate, high-collared blue tunic and a magnificent red cloak that seemed to float around his shoulders with a life of its own. As he stepped fully into the alley, the portal snapped shut behind him with a final, sharp hiss, leaving the three of them, Izuku, the man, and the sentient-looking cloak, under the sputtering fluorescent light. Izuku was frozen, 1,000 panic thoughts trying to fire at once. A villain? A new hero? Is this his quirk? What kind of quirk creates a hole in reality? The man's gaze was intense, analytical, but not unkind. It felt like being X-rayed, not by a machine, but by a mind. Izuku Midoriya, the man said. His Japanese was flawless, but his voice was deep, with a calm authority that commanded absolute attention. Izuku couldn't form words. He could only manage a small, terrified squeak. The man took a half step forward, his expression serious. He knew he was shattering this boy's world for the second time in a single day. But it was a necessary cruelty. "My name is Dr. Stephen Strange," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "We need to talk about the power you just used." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching the confusion and fear war in the boy's wide, green eyes. "Because it's not a quirk. And if you don't learn to control it, it will tear you, and your entire world, apart." The alleyway was a bubble of impossible silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, piercing the fragile veil of Izuku Midoriya's reality more effectively than any physical weapon. "It's not a quirk." The statement was absurd, a flagrant violation of every known law of his world. Everything that wasn't normal was a quirk. From a girl who could create objects from her lipids to a man with an engine in his legs, it was all biology, all science, all quantifiable. There was no other category. It will tear you, and your entire world, apart. This was the part that bypassed his analytical brain and struck a chord of pure, primal fear. The man, Dr. Strange, spoke with the kind of absolute certainty that left no room for doubt. It was the same tone the doctor had used when showing him the X-ray of his two-jointed pinky toe. A statement of fact. What are you? Izuku stammered, his voice a pathetic whisper. He took a half-step back, his hand instinctively balling into a fist. Is this a villain trick? Some kind of fear-based quirk? His mind latched onto the only rational explanation it could find, trying to fit this square, cosmic peg into the round hole of his understanding. Dr. Strange offered a faint, almost pitying smile. A commendable attempt at rationalization. But no. I am not a villain. And what you witnessed was not my quirk. The red cloak on his shoulders shifted, its collar seeming to perk up with interest, an unnervingly sentient gesture. My quirk, to use your terminology, is a photographic memory and an unwavering will. They were quite useful in medical school. Everything else. He gestured vaguely to the space where the shimmering portal had been. Is a matter of discipline and education. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of confusion. Education? You learn to do that? That's impossible. Power is something you're born with. In your reality, perhaps. For the most part, Strange conceded. But your reality is not the only one. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. He wasn't menacing, but the sheer gravity of his presence made Izuku feel rooted to the spot. The outburst you had during the villain attack, the crimson energy, the way reality itself recoiled from you, it sent a shockwave. Not through your city, but through the very fabric of existence. It was an echo in the void, and I am one of the few who can hear such things. He paused, his sharp eyes scanning Izuku's face, gauging his reaction. I am here to offer you a choice. You can ignore what happened today. Write it off as a stress-induced hallucination. Go on with your life. And one day, sooner rather than later, your power, your true power, will erupt again. And when it does, without control or understanding, it will not distinguish between a villain and a city block. Or you can come with me, right now, and begin to learn. Learn? Learn what? The offer was insane. A strange man in a cape appears in a magic circle and offers to teach him how to control a power he doesn't believe he has. It was the setup for a horror movie or a scam. But, the memory of that flicker, the wrongness he had felt, the villain's inexplicable recoil, it was real. He knew it was, and deep down, in the most broken and desperate part of his soul, a treacherous voice whispered, this is a chance. Not to be a hero like All Might, but to be something. Where would we go? Izuku asked, the question itself a concession, an admission that he was listening. To your first classroom, Strange said simply. He raised his hands and once again wove the intricate pattern of light. The sparks flew from his fingertips, spinning into another perfect, glowing circle. This time, the portal opened onto a scene of profound neglect. Heaps of rusted metal, broken appliances, and mountains of plastic waste were piled high on a sandy shore, silhouetted against the setting sun that bled orange and purple across the horizon. The smell of brine and decay wafted through the portal. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, Izuku breathed, recognizing it instantly. It was a local disgrace, a monument to illegal dumping, a place of chaos and neglect, Strange said, his voice resonating with meaning. A fitting place to begin cleaning up your own. Now, are you coming? Or are you content to remain a danger to yourself and everyone around you? The choice was no choice at all. It was an ultimatum wrapped in a mystery. With a deep, trembling breath that felt like a leap off a cliff, Izuku Midoriya took a single step forward and walked through the portal. The transition was nauseating. For a split second, his body felt like it was turned inside out and squeezed through a pinhole. Colors he had no name for flashed behind his eyes, and he heard a sound like a choir singing a mathematical equation. Then, his red sneakers hit sand, and the portal snapped shut behind him with a sound like tearing silk. The mundane smell of the polluted beach rushed back in, grounding him. He stumbled, his head swimming. What was that? A shortcut, Strange replied, unfazed. He stood on the sand, his fine leather shoes somehow remaining immaculate. The cloak of levitation billowed gently in the sea breeze. Now, for your first lesson, the one upon which all others will be built. He turned to face Izuku, his expression becoming that of a stern professor. Forget everything you think you know. Forget quirks. Forget biology. Forget physics as you understand them. They are localized bylaws. I am here to teach you the constitution of existence itself. Izuku, ever the student, pulled out his scorched notebook and a pen, a nervous habit he couldn't break. Strange raised an eyebrow. You won't need that, he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. This knowledge cannot be written down. It must be understood. Your world, your entire universe, is but one leaf on an infinite tree, one reality in a multiverse of possibilities. Most beings live and die on their single leaf, never knowing the tree exists. But there are forces, entities, powers, cosmic parasites, that can travel between the leaves. It is the job of the Sorcerer Supreme to protect his leaf from such threats. Sorcerer Supreme? Izuku squeaked, scribbling the term down before he could stop himself. That's me, Strange said, with no particular pride. It was a job title, not a boast. Now to you? In every reality, there is a focal point, a living anchor that binds that universe's unique properties together. A Nexus being. In this reality, that being is you, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku stared at him, his pen frozen over the page. Me? But I'm quirkless. I'm a nobody. I'm Deku. The name slipped out, a bitter, reflexive admission of his own worthlessness. Precisely, Strange stated, his gaze intensifying. That is not a weakness, boy. It is your single greatest asset. Think of it this way, quirks are like programs, hard-coded into a person's biological operating system. They are powerful, but they are also rigid. A man with a fire quirk can only ever produce fire. He cannot produce ice. He is locked into his function. You, on the other hand, are a clean slate. You have no pre-installed programs. You are pure, unfiltered potential, a blank command prompt with administrative access to the source code of reality itself. He let that sink in. The idea was so profound, so utterly subversive to everything Izuku had ever been taught, that his brain struggled to process it. His greatest shame, the core of his suffering, was actually a prerequisite. This power, Strange continued, has a name. It is called chaos magic. It's an ancient, primordial force that predates the universe. It is the power of uncreation, of possibility. It does not follow the rules of reality. It tells reality what the rules are. And it responds to one thing and one thing only, will. Pure, unadulterated will, amplified by emotion. He gestured to the vast junkyard of a beach. Your desperation to save your friend, your despair at your own powerlessness. It was the perfect emotional catalyst. You didn't just want to save him. You willed it. You screamed at reality that the current situation was unacceptable, and for a fraction of a second, reality listened. Izuku looked at his own hands. They were trembling. The hands of a quirkless boy. The hands that, according to this impossible man, had touched the very source code of the world. So, Strange said, his tone shifting from lecture to instruction. Your first lesson. The foundation of control. He pointed a long, elegant finger at a single, dented aluminum can lying half buried in the sand about 10 feet away. Make it levitate. Izuku blinked. Levitate it? Like, with telekinesis? Do not label it with the limited vocabulary of your world, Strange chided gently. Do not think about how. There is no scientific mechanism. There are no psychic muscles to flex. There is only the desire, and the result. Look at that can. See it in your mind's eye, floating in the air. Want it to be there. Will it to be there. Do not hope, do not try. Do. This was it. His first step into a larger world. Izuku took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic drumming of his heart. He focused on the can. It was just a piece of trash. Simple. He stared at it, his brow furrowed in concentration. Float, he thought, putting as much mental energy as he could into the word. Levitate. Rise up. The kin remained stubbornly inert. The only thing that moved was a small crab skittering away from it. He tried again, harder this time. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He pictured the kin rising, just like Strange said. He imagined the physics of it, the gravitational force being counteracted by an equal and opposite force that he was somehow generating. He calculated the can's approximate mass, the force needed. Stop thinking, Strange's voice cut through his concentration. You are trying to write a physics equation for a poem. The two do not speak the same language. Frustration began to bubble in Izuku's chest. I don't understand. How am I supposed to will it without thinking about it? The will is a thought, is it? Strange countered. When you ran to save your friend, were you thinking? Or were you acting on a singular, primal imperative that bypassed conscious thought entirely? That is the state you must find, not the panic, but the purity of intent. Your analytical mind, the very thing that makes you a brilliant student, is a cage in this discipline. You must learn to open the door. Izuku turned back to the can. He tried to clear his mind, but it was impossible. His thoughts were a frantic storm of doubt, hope, and scientific principles. This is crazy. Magic isn't real. What am I doing? But what if it is? If I can do this, what does it mean? Can I be a hero? All Might said no, but he doesn't know about this. Is this a power a hero should even have? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery strokes of crimson and gold. The kin did not move. Tears of frustration welled in Izuku's eyes. It was happening all over again. He was being presented with a new, incredible kind of power, and he was failing. He was useless. Quirkless. And now, apparently, magicless too. The despair he had felt on the rooftop, the crushing weight of All Might's rejection, came rushing back, fresh and raw. You have to be realistic, kid, Bakugo's sneering face flashed in his mind. Useless Deku. You'll never amount to anything, the doctor's clinical dismissal. You should probably give it up. I can't do it. Izuku finally choked out, the words ripped from his throat in a sob of pure, unadulterated anguish. I can't do anything. I just wanted to save people. I just wanted to be a hero. Why can't I do this one thing? He wasn't focused on the kin anymore. He wasn't focused on anything. He was lost in a sea of his own failure, a lifetime of inadequacy cresting into a single, massive wave of self-hatred. And in that moment of absolute emotional surrender, the chaos magic answered. It did not come from his hands this time. It erupted from his very being. A wave of visible, blood-red energy, glitching and crackling like corrupted data, pulsed outward from him in a perfect circle. The aluminum kin didn't levitate. It was instantly compressed into a tiny, white-hot ball before vaporizing with a sharp hiss. But it didn't stop there. To Izuku's left stood a massive, discarded refrigerator, its white enamel paint peeling to reveal a skeleton of rust. The crimson wave washed over it. The refrigerator didn't just get pushed back, it aged. Decades, centuries, millennia of decay occurred in a single second. The metal crumbled into a cloud of red-brown dust, the plastic components yellowed and turned brittle, disintegrating into nothing. The coolant inside burst its lines and flash froze a patch of air, which then shattered like glass. The entire appliance, a monument of mid-20th century manufacturing, was reduced to a pile of oxidized powder and cosmic regret. The sand beneath where the fridge had been met a different fate. The intense, reality-warping energy didn't just heat it, it rewrote its fundamental properties. The silicon molecules were twisted into a new, impossible crystalline structure. With a sickening crunch, a 10-foot radius of sand was transmuted instantly into jagged, obsidian black glass, sharp and glistening under the twilight sky. The wave of power dissipated as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Izuku stared, his breath hitched in his throat, his eyes wide with horror at the casual, terrifying destruction he had just wrought. He hadn't just moved something. He had unmade it. He had violated the very laws of conservation of mass and energy. By the fangs of the Fa'ala, Strange swore under his breath, his usual composure cracking for a fraction of a second. The sheer, raw power was far greater than he had anticipated. He had known the boy was a bomb. He hadn't realized the fuse was quite so short. This was a containment failure. This kind of raw reality bleed could not be left on the open plain. It would leave a scar, a residue that would attract unwanted attention. He had to isolate them. Boy, stay calm, Strange commanded, his voice sharp and steady again. He strode forward, raising his hands. Do not be afraid. This is merely a change in venue. He slammed his hands together, and then pushed them apart, a complex glyph of golden light flaring between his palms. He pushed the glyph forward, toward the world itself. For Izuku, reality broke. The world fractured as if it were made of glass. 1,000 crystalline planes appeared, reflecting distorted versions of the beach, the sky, and his own terrified face. The colors inverted, the orange sunset turning a deep, electric blue, the black glass turning a blinding white. The sound of the ocean vanished, replaced by a low, humming silence that was more deafening than any noise. The very ground beneath him seemed to fold in on itself, the piles of trash and the distant city skyline twisting into an Escher-like architectural nightmare. Gravity felt optional. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya, Dr. Strange said, his voice echoing from multiple directions at once as he stood serenely in the midst of the kaleidoscopic chaos, to the mirror dimension. Izuku stumbled back, his mind reeling from the sensory assault. What is this place? He gasped, looking up to see the sea folding over them like a ceiling, the waves frozen in place. A parallel dimension that overlays our own, Strange explained, walking toward the spot where the refrigerator had been. He ran a hand over the sharp, black glass, his fingers passing right through it. To Izuku's astonishment, the sand beneath was undisturbed. In here, we can cut loose. We can break things. And whatever happens in the mirror dimension has no effect on the real world. It is the ultimate training ground. A safety net. He turned back to Izuku, his expression deadly serious. Now. Do you see? Do you finally understand what you are wielding? He gestured around them. With a flick of his wrist, a nearby pile of scrapped cars unfolded like origami, their metal skins stretching and reforming into a giant, metallic bird that perched on a skyscraper that had bent itself into a loop-de-loop. This, Strange said, his voice resonating with power, is what you did. Not the parlor trick with the cars. The principle. You did not push the refrigerator, you told its story to end. You did not melt the sand, you rewrote its nature. The grammar of reality, Izuku. Most people, most quirks, can only add new words to the sentence of existence. A fire user can add the word fire. You have the innate ability to change the punctuation, to erase verbs, to redefine the nouns. You are a walking, talking cosmological editor. Awe and terror warred in Izuku's chest. He looked at his hands again, no longer seeing them as useless, but as weapons of unimaginable power that he had absolutely no idea how to aim, let alone holster. The horror of what he could have done, what he would do if he lost control again, was a cold dread that seeped into his bones. He could have killed someone. He could have erased them from existence as easily as he had that fridge. Why me? He whispered, the question full of a pain that went deeper than his quirklessness. Why give something so dangerous to someone so weak? Strange's expression softened slightly. He let the metallic bird dissolve back into a pile of junk cars and walked until he was standing in front of the boy. The cloak settled around him, as if offering comfort. I do not believe it was given. I believe it simply is. And perhaps the cosmos, in its infinite and often cruel wisdom, knew that a power that responds to will and emotion should belong to someone whose will is so singularly focused on saving others. A power like this in the hands of a man who desires conquest, like a Stain or the villains you see on the news, would be a universe-ending catastrophe. In the hands of someone who desires only to protect, it is a fighting chance. He looked Izuku straight in the eye. But a chance is all it is. Good intentions are not a shield. Your emotions, your despair, your righteous anger, they are the fuel. Right now, you are pouring gasoline on a bonfire. I am going to teach you how to build a controlled fusion reactor. It will be the hardest thing you have ever done. It will require a level of physical and mental discipline you cannot yet fathom. Strange gestured, and the fractured reality of the mirror dimension dissolved, the colors snapping back to normal, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore returning. They were back on the real Dagoba beach, standing on the undisturbed sand. The only evidence of what had transpired was the vaporized can and the lingering smell of ozone. "This is my offer. My price, if you will," Strange said, his voice now calm and even. "I will train you. I will give you the tools to master this incredible, terrifying power. In return, you will help me. You will become a guardian of your reality. There are threats coming, Izuku. Things from between the leaves of the tree that your heroes, for all their strength, are laughably ill-equipped to handle. Threats that don't bleed when you punch them, but feed on the fear your world is so good at producing. You will be the secret shield that protects them from the horrors they are not even aware exist." He held out a hand. It was not a gesture of friendship, but of contract. "A pact. I will teach you to control the chaos within you. In exchange, you will use that control to protect your home. Do we have a deal?" Izuku looked at the outstretched hand. He looked at the mountain of trash that represented a decade of neglect. He looked at his own trembling fingers, which held the power to both save and annihilate. All his life, he had wanted a quirk, a tool to be a hero. He had been given something infinitely greater and more terrifying. It wasn't the path he would have chosen. It was a path fraught with dangers he couldn't even imagine. But it was a path, and for the first time since he stood on that rooftop, he felt a flicker, not of chaos, but of genuine, terrifying hope. He was not just Deku, the quirkless failure. He was an anomaly. An impossibility, a student of the Sorcerer Supreme. With a resolve that firmed his trembling hand, Izuku Midoriya reached out and shook Dr. Strange's hand. "Deal," he said, his voice quiet, but for the first time in a long time, steady. "When do we start?" Strange smiled, a true, genuine smile this time. He gestured to the mountains of garbage surrounding them. "We start now," he said. "Your body must be a worthy vessel for such power. Physical discipline forges mental discipline. All Might will eventually tell you to clean this beach to inherit his power. I am telling you to clean it to keep from destroying the world with your own. Every piece of trash you move, you will do so with your own 2 hands. And with every piece, you will practice finding the calm center of your emotional storm. Your training has already begun." The 10 months that followed were a study in schism. Izuku Midoriya's life split into 2 distinct, opposing currents, a secret duality that threatened to tear his very soul in 2. He existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion, his body and mind pushed to limits he hadn't known existed, under the tutelage of 2 masters who could not have been more different. His days belonged to All Might. Or rather, they belonged to the American Dream Plan, a meticulously detailed training and diet regimen emailed to him by the symbol of peace. The plan was quintessentially All Might, bold, straightforward, and relentlessly optimistic. It was a regimen of pure physical grit. His classroom was Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, and his textbook was 10 years of industrial and domestic neglect. Every morning before the sun rose, Izuku was there. He hauled waterlogged tires from the sucking mud, their weight a brutal testament to his weakness. He dragged rusted car chassis across the sand, the grating shriek of metal a soundtrack to his burning muscles. He filled truck after truck with mountains of plastic bottles and broken appliances. The work was grueling, Sisyphean. His hands, soft and accustomed to holding nothing heavier than a pen, were soon a raw mess of blisters, calluses, and new scars. His body, small and underdeveloped, screamed in protest. But All Might's spirit was an infectious force. The hero would often appear in his skeletal form, Yagi Tashinori, offering a bottle of water, a protein bar, or a word of encouragement. "Young Midoriya, your progress is excellent. Feel that burn? That's the cry of your muscles getting stronger. That's your body getting ready to become a proper vessel. Plus ultra." His philosophy was one of tangible effort yielding tangible results. Lift more, become stronger. Run farther, increase your stamina. It was a simple, heroic equation that Izuku could understand. It was science. It was real. With every ton of trash he cleared, he saw a corresponding change. His shoulders broadened. The soft lines of his face hardened. Muscle, lean and hard-won, began to define his limbs. He was physically transforming, sculpting his body into the image of a hero. This was the dream he had always chased, and he pursued it with a desperate, feverish devotion. His nights, however, belonged to Dr. Strange. When the physical work was done, after he had collapsed into bed with every fiber of his being aching, the real training would often begin. Sometimes it was an astral projection, strange shimmering, translucent form appearing at the foot of his bed, his voice a calm whisper in the quiet of the night. More often, a familiar, spinning circle of golden sparks would open in his room, and Izuku would step through into the fractured, kaleidoscopic reality of the mirror dimension. Here, the rules of the physical world were irrelevant. Muscle meant nothing. Stamina was a foreign concept. The training was entirely internal, a harrowing journey into the chaotic landscape of his own psyche. Your emotions are a loaded weapon, Izuku, Strange's voice would echo in the non-space, as twisted cityscapes folded around them. And your finger is perpetually on the trigger. We must build you a safety catch, a targeting system, and the discipline not to fire at shadows. The lessons were abstract, frustrating, and terrifying. Strange would conjure scenarios designed to provoke him. A phantasm of the sludge villain would coalesce from the mirrored glass, its form more monstrous than he remembered. He would have to face it, not by fighting, but by finding the calm center of his fear and holding it at bay. A spectral Bakugo would appear, spitting his cruelest taunts, and Izuku would have to stand unflinching, mastering the surge of anger and hurt that rose in his throat. Chaos magic feeds on the storm, Strange explained, as Izuku struggled to keep his breathing even while a phantasm of his younger self was being shoved by other children. It doesn't care if the storm is fear, or rage, or even joy. It only cares about the intensity. You must learn to be the eye of your own hurricane, to feel the winds, to acknowledge their power, but to remain still and absolute at the center. He taught Izuku to meditate, to visualize his emotions as colors, a seething red for anger, a cold blue for despair, a vibrant yellow for hope, and to learn not to suppress them, but to contain them, to hold them within himself without letting them spill out and warp the world around him. He would have Izuku hold a mirrored shard of reality and try to make a single, controlled change, turning its color from blue to green without shattering it. More often than not, the shard would explode into a shower of fractal light, a sign of his failure. The contrast between his two mentors was stark. All Might built him up, praising his effort and celebrating his gains. Strange broke him down, forcing him to confront his deepest insecurities and failures, offering praise only for control, not for effort. Trying is not enough, Strange would say, after Izuku accidentally turned a mirrored lamppost into a shower of writhing snakes. The road to catastrophe is paved with good intentions and poor control. Try again. It was a life of jarring dissonance. By day, he was All Might's hopeful successor, a boy earning his power through sweat and heroism. By night, he was the Sorcerer Supreme's terrified apprentice, a boy wrestling with a cosmic horror movie that lived inside his own soul. One taught him how to be a hero, the other taught him how not to be a monster. And deep inside, a terrifying question began to form: could he truly be one without the other? It was the 7th month. Over 2/3 of the beach was clear, the sand now visible for the first time in years, gleaming under the morning sun. Izuku stood atop a precarious mountain of scrap metal, his shirt off, his body slick with sweat. He was stronger now, his movements sure and practiced. He heard a cough behind him. He turned to see Toshinori, looking even more gaunt than usual, but with a fierce, proud gleam in his eyes. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done it. You've done beautifully." Izuku scrambled down from the pile, his heart thudding. He had a feeling this was a momentous day. "You took my advice to heart," Toshinori continued, gesturing to the cleared coastline. "You went beyond. This is the body of a hero. You are ready." He suddenly buffeted up, steam rolling off him, into his All Might form. The change was still shocking, a sudden explosion of presence and power. "A story for you, my boy." All Might boomed, his smile a force of nature. "My quirk was not my own. It is a power passed down from one generation to the next. It is a sacred torch, passed from person to person, cultivating and growing stronger with each new user. And this power is called One for All." He plucked a single hair from his head. The gesture was so mundane, so comically underwhelming compared to the grandeur of his speech, that Izuku just stared. "Eat this," All Might declared. Izuku's brain, already taxed from months of metaphysical training, nearly short-circuited. "Eat it? To inherit my power," All Might explained, seeing the boy's confusion, "you need to take in my DNA. That's how it works. Now, no time to waste. The exam is in 3 months. Izuku looked at the single strand of blonde hair resting in All Might's colossal palm. This was it. The culmination of his daylight training. The power of the number one hero, offered to him, the quirkless Deku. The joy that erupted in his chest was dizzying, a pure, incandescent thing. Tears welled in his eyes. This was his dream, handed to him by his god. This was a hero's power. A noble power. A power for good. But as he reached out a trembling hand, a cold sliver of dread pierced the joy. A whisper from his other life. Chaos magic. He already had a power, a secret, terrifying power that he was only just beginning to comprehend. The thought felt like a betrayal. He pushed it down. The chaos magic was an anomaly. A cosmic accident. It was dangerous, volatile, and Strange had all but told him it wasn't the kind of power you paraded around in a bright costume. One for All was different. OFA was heroism, distilled and sanctified. It was his ticket to legitimacy. It was the power he wanted, the one he felt he could be proud of. "I need a real quirk to be a real hero," he told himself, the justification clicking into place with desperate speed. The other is just for the shadows. For the things Strange talked about. This is for the light. With a renewed, slightly frantic determination, he took the hair from All Might's hand. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank you so much." He swallowed it down, the act feeling both ridiculous and profoundly sacred. He was no longer just Izuku Midoriya, the apprentice sorcerer. He was now Izuku Midoriya, the ninth holder of One for All. His soul had just become a battleground. That night, the mirror dimension felt colder than usual. "You accepted it," Strange stated. It wasn't a question. He stood on a ceiling that was the floor, the laws of gravity a polite suggestion he was currently ignoring. "Yes," Izuku said, standing on what he perceived to be the ground. He couldn't bring himself to meet the sorcerer's gaze. "I will not forbid it," Strange said, his voice calm and even, which was somehow more unnerving than anger. "It is your life. Your choice. But you must understand precisely what you have done." He gestured, and the space between them filled with two shimmering, ethereal constructs. One was a perfect, glowing sphere, pulsing with a gentle, golden-white light. Inside it, a complex, crystalline lattice grew and branched, a structure of sublime order and beauty. "This is One for All," Strange explained. "A concentration of ordered will. 8 souls, 8 lifetimes of heroic intent, woven together into a singular, structured purpose. It is rigid. It is powerful. It is, in its own way, beautiful. A fortress of light." Then, he gestured to the other construct. It was a roiling, shapeless mass of crimson and black energy. It did not pulse, it writhed. It was not a structure, it was the absence of structure. It was a vortex, a hungry void that seemed to drink the light around it. "And this," Strange said, his voice dropping, "is chaos magic. The solvent of all order. The force that unwrites the laws that allow fortresses to stand." He slowly pushed the two constructs together. As they drew near, the air between them began to crackle. The golden sphere of OFA seemed to recoil, its light flickering. The crimson mass of chaos surged forward, eager to consume. "You have invited both of these forces to reside in the same vessel," Strange said, his eyes locking onto Izuku's. "You have invited matter and antimatter to a dinner party in your own soul. One for All will try to impose order, to give structure to your power. The chaos magic will resist. It will try to unravel the ordered legacy of OFA, to turn that sacred torch into an uncontrollable wildfire." He let the constructs fade, the sudden silence ringing in Izuku's ears. "The strain," Strange concluded, his form drifting down to stand before Izuku, "may very well tear you apart. Be careful, Izuku Midoriya. You are no longer just learning to control a power. You are now trying to mediate a war inside your own spirit. The day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood before the colossal gates of the most prestigious hero academy in Japan, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He felt overloaded. One for all was a warm, humming presence under his skin. It felt like a reservoir of barely contained kinetic energy, a promise of incredible strength. But it was a foreign energy, a program his body hadn't learned to run yet. Layered beneath it, around it, through it, was the chaos magic. It was a cold, static hum at the base of his skull, a faint pins and needles sensation in his fingertips. The two powers coexisted, but they did not mingle. It was an unstable truce. Strange warning echoed in his mind. His plan was simple. Do not use chaos magic. He had to prove he could be a hero the right way. All Might's way. He would rely on the noble power he had been given, not the terrifying one he had been born with. This exam was a test of his worthiness as OFA's successor. To use chaos magic would be to cheat. It would be an admission that he couldn't handle the gift he'd been given. The practical exam began. The massive gates slid open, and the students surged into the sprawling cityscape mock-up. Izuku was left in the dust, his moment of hesitation costing him precious seconds. He saw his first target, a one-point robot turning a corner. Okay, I can do this, he thought, channeling All Might's bravado. Just focus the power into one limb. A single punch. He felt the warm energy of OFA surge from the core of his being, a torrent of power that was exhilarating and terrifying. He funneled it into his right arm, just as he'd practiced in his mind 1,000 times. He threw a punch. The robot exploded into a shower of shrapnel. A direct hit. A perfect takedown. Then came the recoil. An agony unlike anything he had ever known shot up his arm. The sensation of his bones snapping was sickeningly audible, a wet crunch that echoed in his ears. His arm hung limp and useless at his side, a grotesque, swollen mess of purple and blue. The sheer force of OFA, with no bodily reinforcement to handle it, had turned his limb into a bag of broken glass. He stumbled back, his vision swimming with white-hot pain. 1 point. And he was already crippled. Panic began to set in. He saw other students racking up points with ease. Bakugo with his devastating explosions, a boy with laser beams, a girl with an acid quirk. He was falling behind. He tried to use OFA with his legs, with his other arm, but the results were the same, a successful takedown followed by catastrophic, debilitating injury. Soon, he was a wreck. Both legs and one arm were broken. He had a handful of points, but he was effectively out of the fight, a broken puppet lying in the street. The ground began to tremble. A shadow fell over him, vast and absolute. The 0-pointer. It was a monstrosity of steel and circuits, a walking skyscraper that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. Its single red eye glowed with malevolent purpose. It wasn't a target, it was an obstacle, an engine of pure, pointless destruction. Everyone ran. Its purpose was to induce panic, to test the hero's ability to retreat and reassess. Izuku, unable to move, could only watch in horror as it advanced. Then, he heard a cry. Ow! He turned his head, the pain excruciating. Lying trapped under a pile of rubble caused by the 0-pointer's advance was the kind girl who had saved him from tripping earlier, the one with the round face and zero-gravity quirk. Her leg was pinned. She couldn't escape. The robot's massive metal foot rose high into the air, ready to crush her into oblivion. In that instant, the world went silent. The pain in his limbs vanished. The frantic calculations of points and scores evaporated. The internal debate between All Might's way and Strange's way ceased. There was only one thought, the same thought that had triggered his first burst of power, the same singular, primal imperative that was the core of his being. I have to save her. Use one for all. A part of his brain screamed. One last, desperate punch, but my last good arm will be destroyed. Another part countered. I'll be completely useless. I won't be able to help her after. Use the other power. A cold, quiet voice whispered. The voice of Strange. The solvent of order. No! It's too dangerous. What if I miss? What if I hit her? What if I can't control it and unmake the entire city block? The robot's foot began its descent. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. Time was up. Izuku surged to his feet, a cry of defiance tearing from his throat. He didn't rear back for a punch. He didn't channel the warm, golden energy of OFA. He reached out with his one good hand, his fingers splayed, not to strike, but to command. The cold, static hum of chaos magic flooded his senses. It was not a torrent like OFA, it was a deluge. He focused every ounce of his will, every fiber of his desperate need to protect, on the colossal machine before him. He didn't want to destroy it. He wanted it to stop. He wanted it to fail. He willed it. A faint, glitching crimson static, visible only for a split second, crackled around his outstretched hand. There was no earth-shattering boom. No shockwave. The effect was far more insidious, far more terrifying. The zero-pointer's descent stuttered. A low, groaning sound, like a dying wail, echoed from deep within its chassis. It wasn't the sound of external damage, but of internal, catastrophic failure. The massive armored plates on its legs began to buckle inward, as if suddenly losing their molecular integrity. Rivets popped like champagne corks, not flying outward, but dropping limply to the ground. The robot's primary arm, raised for balance, began to twist like a wet noodle, its support struts warping and sagging under a weight that hadn't changed. From the observation booth, the teachers stared in stunned silence. President Mike, who had been shouting commentary, fell silent. What in the... Aizawa murmured, his eyes widening behind his goggles as he stared at the monitors. Is that telekinesis? No, Nizu, the principal, said softly, his beady eyes fixed on the screen, a flicker of something unreadable on his face. Telekinesis applies force. That's not force. That's deconstruction. On the ground, the zero-pointer groaned one last time. Its internal structure, its very concept of structural integrity, had been fundamentally compromised. It was no longer a machine. It was just a collection of parts that had forgotten how to hold themselves together. With a final, sighing collapse, it folded in on itself, its colossal frame imploding into a mountain of twisted, non-functional scrap metal, its red eye flickering out with a pathetic fizz. It fell just short of the girl, its shadow the only thing that touched her. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku fell to his knees, his good arm trembling violently. He wasn't in pain, not from the chaos magic. There was no recoil, no broken bones. But he felt, hollowed out, drained to the very marrow of his soul, as if he had poured a piece of his own spirit into that act of uncreation. He looked at his hand, intact and unharmed. He had done it. He had saved her. But he had used the forbidden power. He had cheated. And as he looked at the impossible ruin of the zero-pointer, a new kind of fear settled in his heart. He had passed the test. He had become a hero, if only for a moment. But he had just put a dangerous, inexplicable question mark next to his own name, one that he knew the heroes in the observation booth would be desperate to solve. The war in his soul had just had its first public battle, and the victor was chaos. The acceptance letter from Yuri arrived in a simple, unassuming envelope. It was not, as Izuku had dreaded, a summons for interrogation or a notice of disqualification. It was a projection disc. When activated, it flickered to life, bathing his cluttered bedroom in a holographic glow. All Might appeared, not in his gaunt form, but in his full, heroic glory, dressed in a garish yellow suit. I am here. As a projection. He boomed, the familiar catchphrase sending a jolt of relief and anxiety through Izuku. All Might launched into a dramatic recounting of the exam, praising Izuku's heroic spirit. He explained the secret mechanic of the test, rescue points. For saving the nice girl, Ochako Uraraka, he learned her name was, Izuku had been awarded 60 points, more than enough for a passing grade. Your actions moved me, young Midoriya. All Might declared, his holographic image beaming with pride. You embody the true spirit of a hero. Self-sacrifice. Welcome to your hero academia. Izuku wept. He had done it. He was in. The overwhelming relief was a tidal wave, washing away some of the gnawing fear that had taken root since the exam. All Might's validation was a soothing balm on his fractured confidence. His mentor saw his actions, not the method, and judged them heroic. For a moment, Izuku allowed himself to believe that was all that mattered, but as the hologram faded, leaving him in the quiet of his room, the cold reality of his secret returned. He had gotten in, yes. But he had gotten in under false pretenses. His application listed his quirk as superpower, a vague and misleading placeholder All Might had suggested. It was a lie of omission that felt as heavy as a mountain. He had demonstrated two completely different powers during the exam, one that broke his body, and one that broke reality. He now had to walk into the most prestigious heroes' school in the country, a place filled with the best and brightest pro-heroes and analysts, and somehow conceal the fact that he was a walking, talking cosmological anomaly. It was a terrifying prospect. In the mirror dimension that night, Strange was pragmatic. "Congratulations on your acceptance," the sorcerer said, as they stood on the underside of a reflected Shiodome bridge, traffic passing silently above them. "But do not mistake a single victory for the end of the war. UA is a crucible. It is a place of constant scrutiny, of intense emotional and physical pressure. For a nascent chaos magic wielder, it is a minefield." "I know," Izuku whispered, looking at his own reflection in the mirrored water below. "They'll be watching me." "More than you know," Strange confirmed, his tone grim. "The collapse of that machine was not a quirk as your people understand it. It was too clean, too conceptual. You did not apply force, you applied a paradox. Aizawa Shoyuda, your homeroom teacher, is a man who deals in logic and observable phenomena. Your very existence will be an offense to his worldview. Principal Nizu, the creature that runs the school, possesses an intellect that borders on precognition. He will not see you as a student, he will see you as a puzzle to be solved. A dangerous puzzle. So what do I do?" Izuku asked, his voice filled with desperation. "How do I hide it?" "You don't," Strange said simply. "You cannot hide a hurricane. You can only learn to predict its path and minimize its impact. Your control is still rudimentary, tied almost exclusively to moments of extreme emotional distress. Therefore, your first priority at UA is emotional discipline. You must learn to remain calm when provoked, to remain centered when afraid. We will continue your training, but the real test begins now." He turned to Izuku, his eyes seeming to pierce through the boy's very soul. "And remember the most important rule: do not lie if you can help it. Lies are intricate structures. They are orderly. Chaos magic feeds on the emotional stress of maintaining them. A partial truth, an omission, a carefully worded deflection, these are your tools. But a direct lie will make you unstable. It will give the chaos a foothold." The first day at UA was a blur of anxiety. Izuku found his classroom, 1A, and was immediately confronted by the stern, blue-haired boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, and then had a heart-stoppingly awkward conversation with the girl he had saved, Ochako Uraraka. But the true source of his dread was sitting 2 seats behind him, feet propped on his desk, a familiar scowl etched onto his face. Katsuki Bakugo. Bakugo's glare was a physical force. It was filled with a furious, burning confusion. He had seen Izuku at the exam. He had seen the broken limbs, the pathetic flailing, and then he had seen the impossible, silent collapse of the zero-pointer. That hadn't been a punch. That hadn't been the power of All Might, which he had long suspected the useless Deku had somehow stolen or copied. It was something else. Something weird. Something that felt like cheating. The orderly world of power rankings and explosive superiority that Bakugo had built for himself had been cracked by Deku's inexplicable existence, and he was furious. Before any confrontation could erupt, a figure zipped up in a yellow sleeping bag shuffled into the room like a giant, exhausted caterpillar. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, unzipping himself to reveal a tired-looking man with messy black hair, dark eyes, and a scarf that seemed to defy gravity. "Life is short. You're all too irrational." Shoyuta Aizawa. Pro-hero, Eraserhead. His presence immediately sucked the air out of the room. This was the man Strange had warned him about. His gaze swept across the class, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku. It wasn't a look of suspicion, not yet. It was a look of professional assessment, the kind a mechanic gives a car that's making a funny noise. He saw Izuku's name on the roster. He'd seen the footage, he'd read the reports. A boy who manifested a self-destructive strength quirk and then, moments later, a completely different, unclassified power that defied analysis. It didn't add up. Aizawa led them out to the training grounds for a quirk assessment test. You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives, he drawled, his voice a monotone of boredom, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks. It's irrational. He tossed a softball to Bakugo. Bakugo. What was your best throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo stepped into the circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and with a thunderous die, unleashed a massive explosion that propelled the ball into the sky. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum. It's the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The class erupted in excited chatter. This looked fun. Fun? Aizawa's voice dropped, and a menacing aura filled the air. His hair floated up slightly, his eyes glowing a faint red. You think this is fun? For the next 3 years, UA will throw one hardship after another at you. You're here to become heroes. You have no time for fun and games. He smiled, a terrifying, predatory grin. Whoever comes in last place in total points will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic gripped the class. And for Izuku, it was more than just the fear of expulsion. It was a strategic nightmare. Each test was a choice. Use one for all and break a bone, demonstrating a powerful but suicidal quirk? Or attempt a subtle use of chaos magic, risking exposure and a loss of control? He chose OFA for the 50-meter dash. He tried to focus it just in his toes, a tiny burst. The result was a blistering time, but also the sharp, sickening crunch of his toe bones shattering inside his shoe. He hobbled through the grip strength test, his score pathetic. The long jump, another small, bone-breaking burst. His results were a chaotic mess, soaring to the top on a few tests and plummeting to the absolute bottom on others. He was a living contradiction, a glitch in the data set. Aizawa watched him, his expression unreadable. This wasn't the behavior of a student with a single, powerful quirk. It was erratic, nonsensical. It was as if the boy had a dozen different quirks, and no idea how to use any of them without self-destructing. Then came the ball throw. Izuku's last chance. He was currently in last place. Expulsion was a certainty unless he did something incredible. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. He couldn't use OFA again. Breaking his last good arm would make him a liability for the rest of his time at UA, assuming he even had a rest of his time. Be the eye of the storm, Strange's voice echoed in his head. Control. Subtlety. A nudge, not a shove. He took a deep breath. He wouldn't try to unmake the ball. He wouldn't try to teleport it. He would give it a little help. A conceptual nudge. He focused, not on the ball itself, but on the space in front of it. He pictured the air, the molecules of nitrogen and oxygen, becoming more agreeable, less resistant. He wound up and threw the ball with all his natural, human strength. Just as the ball left his fingertips, a faint, almost invisible shimmer distorted the air before it. It wasn't a burst of power. It was a localized warp. For the first 50 feet of its trajectory, the ball encountered virtually no air resistance. It flew with an unnatural silence and speed, as if in a vacuum. Then, as his concentration wavered, reality reasserted itself, and the ball followed a normal arc. It landed with a soft thud far out in the field. Aizawa looked down at the device in his hand. His eyes widened slightly. 705.3 meters. He had beaten Bakugo by 1/10 of a meter. With what looked like a completely quirkless throw, the class murmured in confusion. Bakugo's face went from pale to crimson in a split second. What the hell was that, DKU? He roared, his palms already sparking with miniature explosions. He lunged forward. You've been hiding this power? Tell me how you did that or you're dead. Before Bakugo could reach him, he was suddenly tangled up in Aizawa's binding weapon, the carbon fiber scarf shooting out and wrapping around him with snake-like speed. Stand down, Aizawa's voice was dangerously low. His hair was floating, his eyes glowing red. He had activated his quirk. Don't make me use my quirk so much. I have dry eye. He was looking at Bakugo, but his attention was on Izuku. As he had activated his power, he had focused it on the source of the anomaly, Midoriya. He expected to feel the boy's quirk, whatever it was, be neutralized. And he did. He felt something give way. A faint, warm hum inside Izuku seemed to snuff out like a candle flame. That had to be the super strength quirk, the one that broke his bones. Aizawa recognized the sensation of nullifying an emitter-type quirk, but something else remained. Beneath the quenched warmth of One for All, Aizawa felt a cold, static presence. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And his quirk, Erasure, the ultimate anti-quirk weapon, slid right off it. It was like trying to grab smoke. It had no biological anchor, no quirk factor for him to target. It wasn't just resistant to his power, it was completely, fundamentally immune. It existed on a different plane, operating by rules he couldn't comprehend. A cold dread, something he hadn't felt since fighting a truly high-end villain, trickled down Aizawa's spine. This isn't a quirk. The thought was immediate, instinctual, and terrifying. He reeled Bakugo in, released him with a final warning, and turned his full, unnerving attention to Izuku. Midoriya. Explain your quirk. Now. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. Strange warning, a partial truth. An omission. It's complicated, he stammered, his mind racing. It's a strength enhancement quirk, but it's really unstable. It hurts me when I use it. I can't control the output very well. That part was true, that covered Ofei. But what about the ball throw? What about the zero-pointer? The ball throw was not strength enhancement, Aizawa stated flatly. And neither was your performance at the entrance exam. What is the other aspect of your power? The entire class was silent, watching. Izuku felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The pressure was immense. He could feel the chaos magic stirring, feeding on his panic. He had to say something. I don't know, he said, the lie of omission feeling slick and wrong in his mouth. It just happens sometimes, when I'm in danger. I can't control it at all. It feels different. It was a weak, pathetic explanation, and he knew it. But it was the best he could do without revealing a secret that would shatter their understanding of the world. Aizawa stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. He didn't believe him. Not for a second. But he also knew he couldn't force the truth out of him here. We'll be having a long talk later, he said, his voice promising future interrogation. He turned to the class. Oh, and nobody's getting expelled. That was a rational deception to make you push your limits. The class erupted in relief, all except for Izuku, who felt as though he had just been handed a stay of execution, not a pardon. Later that day, in the classroom, the tension was a palpable thing. Bakugo refused to even look at him, radiating a silent, murderous fury. Ida was lecturing him on the recklessness of his quirk, but it was the quiet boy with the heterochromatic eyes and the burned scar who unnerved him the most. Shoto Todoroki. Todoroki hadn't said a word to him, but Izuku could feel his gaze. It was a cold, analytical stare. Todoroki had seen it all, the self-destructive power, the impossible ball throw. Unlike Bakugo's hot-headed confusion, Todoroki's observation was detached, intelligent, and deeply unsettling. He was another puzzle piece, another variable in this impossibly complex equation. Izuku was trying to focus on present mixed English lesson, but his mind was a wreck. The stress of the day, the fear of Aizawa, the weight of his secret, it was all churning inside him. He felt a familiar tingling in his fingertips. The chaos was stirring, agitated by his anxiety. Be the eye of the storm, he repeated internally, a desperate mantra. Calm. Centered. He gripped the cheap wooden pencil on his desk, focusing on its texture, its solid reality. He tried to ground himself, to use the object as an anchor. But his control slipped for just a fraction of a second. He blinked. The object in his hand was no longer a pencil. For a single, horrifying heartbeat, he was holding the delicate, impossible stem of a single, perfect red carnation. Its petals were a deep, vibrant crimson, the exact same shade as the energy that had unmade the zero-pointer. The scent of the flower, sweet and funereal, filled his nostrils. His heart stopped. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. With a surge of desperate will, he forced his power back, focusing on the memory of the pencil, on its yellow paint and graphite core. The flower glitched. Its form seemed to pixelate, and with a faint shimmer that was more felt than seen, it collapsed back into the familiar shape of the pencil. The entire event had lasted less than 2 seconds. No one had noticed. Present Mike was still screaming about grammar. Ida was taking meticulous notes. Bakugo was still stewing in his own rage, except for one person. Izuku slowly lifted his gaze. Across the room, Shoto Todoroki was staring directly at him. His mismatched eyes weren't looking at Izuku's face, but at the pencil in his hand. There was no shock on Todoroki's face. No confusion. Just a flicker of something new in his cold, calculating gaze. Confirmation. He had seen it. Izuku's blood ran cold. The secret he was trying so desperately to keep from his teachers, from the symbol of peace himself, had just been witnessed by a classmate. A classmate who was the son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor. A classmate who looked at him not as a rival, but as an anomaly that he was beginning to understand. That night, there was no portal. Strange appeared as an astral projection, his form shimmering at the edge of Izuku's bed, his expression more serious than ever. "Your control is slipping," Strange said, his voice a disembodied echo. The pencil. I felt the ripple from the sanctum. It was small, but it was uncontrolled. "I know," Izuku whispered, burying his face in his hands. Todoroki saw it. "Aizawa suspects everything. Bakugo hates me more than ever. I don't think I can do this, Doctor. This place. It's a minefield, just like you said." "It is," Strange agreed. "And you have just walked onto the most active part of it. The constant emotional triggers, the scrutiny, the competition. It is the worst possible environment for you right now. But it is also the best." Izuku looked up, confused. "The best? A blade is not sharpened on silk, Izuku. It is sharpened on a whetstone. This is your whetstone. Every challenge, every provocation, is an opportunity to practice control." Todoroki's suspicion? Use it to practice subtlety. Bakugo's rage? Use it to master your own anger. Aizawa's scrutiny? Use it to perfect your deflection. His spectral form drifted closer, his gaze unwavering. "But be warned. The events of today have consequences. You are no longer just an unknown variable. You are a glitch in their system, and systems, by their very nature, have ways of trying to correct glitches. Sometimes by analysis. Sometimes by deletion. Be on your guard." Your life just became infinitely more complicated. The astral form faded, leaving Izuku alone in the dark. He looked at the pencil on his nightstand, a simple object that had, for a moment, been a piece of impossible, reality-defying magic. The glitch wasn't in the system. It was him. And he was beginning to fear what would happen when the system finally decided to reboot. The days following the quirk assessment test were a tightrope walk over a canyon of paranoia. Every glance from Aizawa felt like an interrogation. Every cold, analytical stare from Todoroki felt like a judgment. Every snarled insult from Bakugo was a test of the fragile emotional walls Izuku was desperately trying to build around his chaotic core. The normalcy of high school life, the drone of lectures, the chatter in the cafeteria, the mundane routine, was a constant, low-grade stressor that left the chaos magic humming under his skin like a trapped wasp. His training was Strange intensified. Night after night, in the fractured safety of the mirror dimension, they worked not on power, but on precision. "Chaos magic is not a hammer," Strange would say, as Izuku tried and failed to turn a single mirrored brick from red to blue without turning the entire wall into a cascade of screaming, fractal faces. "It is a scalpel. You are performing surgery on the very fabric of existence. You cannot afford for your hand to shake." They practice subtlety, creating small, localized probability fields. Izuku would focus on a tumbling die and try to will it to land on a 6. The first 100 times, it would melt into a puddle of goo or explode into a flock of mirrored birds. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to get a feel for it. It wasn't about forcing the die. It was about creating a tiny, fleeting suggestion to the universe. A nudge that made a 6 the most likely, most convenient outcome. He learned to weave small illusions, to bend light just enough to make an object seem slightly to the left of its actual position. These were minor, almost useless tricks, but they were exercises in control. They were the equivalent of a weightlifter starting with a bare barbell, building the foundational muscles needed to one day lift a mountain. The physical training with One for All continued in secret, a frantic effort to make his body a vessel that wouldn't shatter. All Might's advice was simple: clench your butt cheeks and yell smash from the bottom of your heart. It was endearingly simple, but it wasn't enough. Izuku realized he couldn't treat OFA like a switch to be flipped. He had to let it flow, to circulate it through his entire body instead of concentrating it in a single limb. It was like trying to manage two separate, warring power systems. OFA was the orderly, roaring furnace in his core. Chaos was the cold, silent static that permeated everything else. Keeping them from catastrophically interfering with each other took a level of concentration that left him mentally and physically exhausted at all times. Then came the trip to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying. A training exercise in a controlled environment, designed to teach them about rescue operations in different disaster scenarios. It was a chance to finally act like a real hero. 13, the space hero, greeted them at the entrance, their iconic suit and cheerful demeanor a stark contrast to Aizawa's perpetual exhaustion. "I'm sure you all know," 13 said, their synthesized voice full of enthusiasm, "but my quirk is called Black Hole. It can suck up and tear apart anything." The students murmured in awe. "But it is a power that can very easily be used to kill. I'm sure some of you have powers like that as well. In our superhuman society, all quirks are certified and strictly regulated. But please don't forget that any of you possess a power that can turn deadly with a single misstep." 13's gaze seemed to sweep over Izuku, and for a heart-stopping moment, he thought they knew that their speech was directed at him. But it was a general warning, a standard part of the hero curriculum. Yet, it struck him deeper than anyone else. A power that can turn deadly with a single misstep. He didn't just have one. He had two. As 13 finished their speech, the lights in the massive dome began to flicker. The central water fountain sputtered and died. A low, ominous hum filled the air. In the center of the plaza below, a swirling vortex of dark, purple-black mist appeared. It was ugly, unnatural, like a wound opening in the world. It was not like Doctor Strange's clean, sparking portals. This was a messy, violent intrusion. A hand, pale and skeletal, emerged from the mist first. Then a face, covered in more disembodied hands, one of them obscuring his features like a grotesque mask. A skinny man with wild, light blue hair stepped through, scratching at his neck with a frantic, agitated energy. He was followed by dozens of others, a motley, terrifying collection of thugs and low-life villains, their eyes filled with a predatory glee. But it was the last two figures that emerged that made Izuku's blood run cold. One was the purple mist itself, which coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape with glowing yellow eyes, a being of pure warp-gate energy. The other was a monster. It was a hulking behemoth, easily the size of All Might, with dark, purplish-black skin, a beak-like mouth, and a brain gruesomely exposed on the top of its skull. It stood with an unnatural stillness, its eyes blank and vacant, a living weapon awaiting a command. "The trespassing drill has started already?" Kirishima asked, his usual optimism misplaced. "Stay back," Aizawa commanded, his voice sharp and urgent as he pulled his yellow goggles over his eyes. His scarf began to float around his neck. "This is real. Those are villains." Panic erupted. The man covered in hands spoke, his voice a scratchy, childish rasp that was more unnerving than any roar. 13. Eraserhead. "According to the schedule we procured, All Might is supposed to be here. I wonder, if we kill a few kids, will he show up?" The threat was so blunt, so casually cruel, that it shocked the students into silence. This wasn't a robbery or a smash and grab. This was a targeted attack. They were here for All Might. They were here to kill. Aizawa leaped into action, a lone figure diving down the massive flight of stairs to face an army. He was a whirlwind of motion, his binding cloth a weapon, his quirk-erasing glare turning powerful villains into clumsy brawlers. He was incredible, a master of his craft. But he was one man against dozens. As the students turned to flee, the purple mist villain, Kurogiri, teleported in front of them, blocking their escape. I won't let you. It is a pleasure to meet you. We are the League of Villains. We have invited ourselves into the home of heroes in order to have All Might, the symbol of peace, draw his last breath. Bakugo and Kirishima, ever the hotheads, rushed forward, unleashing their explosions. But they had no effect on the villain's gaseous form. Before anyone could react, Kurogiri expanded, his misty body enveloping the students. My job is to scatter you and torture you to death. Izuku felt a sickening lurch, a sensation of being pulled apart and reassembled. The world dissolved into a purple-black void for a terrifying second, and then he was falling. He hit the water with a hard splash, the cold shock stealing his breath. He surfaced, gasping, in the shipwreck zone. The water was churning, and villains with aquatic quirks were closing in, their faces twisted into ugly sneers. He wasn't alone. Tsuyu Ajiri, the frog girl, landed gracefully on the ship's deck, and a terrified, weeping Minoru Mineta bobbed in the water nearby. This is bad, Ribbit, Ajiri said, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to Mineta's hysterical screaming. They knew the schedule. They have someone with a warp quirk. They planned this. They're not just mindless thugs. Izuku's mind raced, pushing past the panic. Ajiri was right. This was a coordinated, intelligent attack. And they had a monster specifically designed to fight All Might. Aizawa was outnumbered. They were all in danger. A villain with a shark-like head lunged at them. Izuku reacted on instinct. He channeled One for All into his fingers, letting the green, crackling energy flow. Delaware smash! He flicked his finger, and the resulting blast of air pressure created a massive whirlpool in the water, sucking in the surrounding villains and blasting them away from the ship. The power was immense. It saved them. But the price was immediate and agonizing. His index finger on his right hand broke with a sickening snap, turning a bruised, swollen purple. The pain was blinding, but he grit his teeth against it. Midoriya, that was amazing. Mineta cried, his tears momentarily forgotten. But you can't keep doing that, Ribbit, Ajiri observed, her perceptive gaze fixed on his mangled finger. You're hurting yourself. She was right. He had maybe 7 more of those attacks before his body was completely broken. It was a finite, self-destructive resource. And it wasn't enough. A new group of villains began to climb onto the deck of the ship. Izuku, clutching his broken finger, felt a surge of cold dread. He couldn't fight them all with OFA. He would be crippled and useless in minutes. Subtlety, strange voice echoed in his mind. A nudge, not a shove. He had to try. He couldn't afford a flashy, reality-breaking display. He needed something small. A probability hex. As the first villain, a man with barnacles growing on his skin, swung a rusty pipe at him, Izuku focused. He didn't try to stop the pipe. He didn't try to erect a shield. He focused on the concept of balance. He willed a tiny, localized pocket of misfortune to manifest under the villain's feet. The villain's foot, planted firmly on the metal deck, suddenly slipped as if he'd stepped on a patch of black ice. His attack went wide, and he stumbled, crashing into 2 of his companions. They went down in a clumsy heap of limbs. It was so natural, so mundane, that no one even registered it as a power. They just saw a clumsy oaf. Another villain, a woman who could spit corrosive acid, aimed at Ajiri. Izuku shifted his focus, this time on the concept of trajectory. He didn't stop the acid. He just suggested a slight, almost imperceptible crosswind. The glob of acid veered just enough to sizzle harmlessly against the ship's railing, inches from its target. He was doing it. He was manipulating reality on a micro scale, weaving bad luck and inconvenient physics into the tapestry of the fight. It was draining, requiring a level of concentration that made his head pound, but it was working. He, Ajiri, and Mineta managed to hold their own, their teamwork and Izuku's hidden, lucky interventions keeping the villains off balance. They eventually formulated a plan, using their combined quirks to create a massive wave that swept the remaining villains off the ship. They were safe, for now. But as they made their way back to the central plaza, the true horror of the situation became apparent. Aizawa was down. He lay in a pool of his own blood at the feet of the hulking beast, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle, his face a mask of agony. The monster, the Nomu, held him pinned, its massive fingers digging into his flesh. The hand-covered villain, Tamura Shigaraki, cackled with childish glee. "You're so cool, Eraserhead," Shigaraki rasped, scratching his neck furiously. "But you're no match for him. He's the anti-symbol of peace. A bioengineered powerhouse." Noma. Then, the doors to the USJ burst open. And there, at the top of the stairs, stood All Might. His face was not smiling. It was a mask of cold, righteous fury. "I am here," he said, his voice a low, rumbling thunder. The battle that followed was titanic. It was a clash of gods. All Might moved like a blur, his punches shaking the very foundations of the dome. But the Nomu was his perfect counter. It absorbed every blow, its body regenerating from injuries that would have leveled a skyscraper. It was a living shock absorber. All Might was trapped. He was being held by the Nomu, its grip like iron, while Kurogyri opened a warp gate, trying to slice the hero in half. Izuku watched, his heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't just stand by. He launched himself forward, a desperate, reckless blur. He was aiming for Kurogyri, trying to free All Might. He was intercepted by Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki, who had arrived with their own plan. Their combined attack freed All Might, and the tide seemed to turn. All Might squared off against the Nomu again. "You say he has shock absorption," he roared. "Then I'll just have to go beyond that. A hero can always break out of a pinch." He unleashed a flurry of blows so fast they were invisible, each one stronger than the last. "Plus Ultra!" he screamed, his final punch sending the Nomu rocketing out of the dome and into the sky, a man-made meteor disappearing into the clouds. The villains were shocked. Shigaraki was throwing a tantrum, scratching his neck so hard he drew blood. But All Might was at his limit. Steam was beginning to pour off his body. His time was up. "You cheated," Shigaraki whined, his voice rising to a screech. He and Kurogyri rushed forward, aiming for the exhausted hero. Izuku saw it. He saw the steam, the faint flickering of All Might's form. He knew what it meant. His idol, his mentor, the symbol of peace, was about to be exposed. He was about to die. Everything stopped. The frantic thoughts, the strategic calculations, the fear, the pain in his broken finger, it all vanished. It was replaced by a singular, cold, absolute certainty. A new imperative, more powerful than any before it. This is not allowed to happen. He was done with subtlety. He was done with holding back. He was done trying to mediate the war in his soul. Right now, he needed a weapon, and he had one. The ultimate one. He stopped trying to be the eye of the storm and, for the first time, decided to become the storm. He stepped forward, past Kirishima's hardened arm, past Todoroki's wall of ice. He raised a hand, not toward Shigaraki, but toward the true threat. The one Aizawa couldn't erase. The one All Might couldn't destroy. He pointed at the Nomu, which was already beginning to fall back to earth, regenerating midair. "Midoriya, no!" All Might choked out, recognizing the terrifying stillness in the boy's posture. A torrent of power, raw and untamed, erupted from Izuku. It was not the green lightning of One for All. It was a flood of pure, glitching, reality-defying crimson. The air warped around him, and the ground at his feet cracked, not from pressure, but from a fundamental violation of its own existence. The energy did not travel like a beam. It simply appeared, enveloping the falling Nomu in a cage of blood-red static. And then Izuku unleashed. He didn't try to punch it. He didn't try to burn it. He reached out with the scalpel of his mind, powered by the full, unfiltered force of the chaos magic, and he began to cut. But he wasn't cutting flesh. He was cutting the code. The Nomu, a creature of bioengineered science, a being of muscle, bone, and stolen quirks, was suddenly subjected to a force that did not recognize biology, or science, or the laws of thermodynamics. It began to glitch. Its dark skin flickered, turning a horrifying magenta, then a digital green, then transparent, revealing the roiling organs within. Its form stuttered, like a corrupted video file, stretching and compressing in impossible ways. Its beak-like mouth opened, and the sound that came out was not a scream of pain. It was the sound of a dial-up modem trying to connect to a server that no longer existed. It was the shriek of a program being forcibly deleted, byte by byte. The exposed brain on its head bubbled, not with heat, but as if its very matter was boiling away into pure information. Its muscle fibers, designed to absorb kinetic energy, unraveled into glowing, code-like strands of light that drifted away into nothingness. Its bones turned to a liquid that was the color of a television tuned to a dead channel, before evaporating. Everyone, the students, the remaining villains, the newly arrived pro-heroes at the entrance, stared in absolute, frozen horror. This was not a fight. It was an execution. It was an erasure. Shigaraki stopped scratching. His hand fell to his side. The childish tantrum was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed, primal terror. This wasn't a hero's power. This wasn't part of the game. The Nomu was his ultimate weapon, his cheat code to win against All Might. And this child, this plain-looking, green-haired child, had just hit delete on it. He hadn't just broken his toy. He had unwritten the rules that allowed the toy to exist in the first place. With a final, silent implosion of glitching light, the Nomu was gone. Not destroyed, not beaten. Gone. All that remained was a faint, lingering smell of ozone and burnt sugar, and a shower of fine, non-biological gray dust that settled on the plaza floor like morbid snow. The silence that followed was more profound than any explosion. Izuku stood in the center of it all, his arms still outstretched, the crimson energy slowly fading from around him like an afterimage burned onto the world. He was trembling, not from exertion, but from the sheer, terrifying intimacy of what he had just done. He hadn't just wielded a power. He had become, for a moment, a law of uncreation. He had felt the Nomu's existence as a tangible thing, a complex sentence in the book of reality, and he had erased it, word by word. He slowly lowered his arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and self-loathing. He had saved them. He had saved All Might. But the looks on the faces around him were not looks of gratitude. Kirishima and Bakugo stared with slack-jawed disbelief. Uraraka had her hands over her mouth, her eyes filled with fear. Todoroki's usual stoicism was shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. And All Might looked at him, at his successor, his chosen heir. And in the hero's eyes there was no pride. There was no relief. There was only a deep, profound, and soul-shattering fear. This was not the power of one for all. This was not the power of a hero. This was the power to break the world.